Hi, everyone. It's Helen from SMB Deal Hunter. Today we have Bill Haig with us, an acquisition entrepreneur who acquired a gym in Northern Virginia, Starfit Studio, and has since expanded it into 3 locations, now opening their 4th location this year. Super excited to hear Bill's story. Bill, it's great to have you on today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be on. Appreciate it.
Bill, let's start with your background. Sort of what were you doing prior to buying businesses? What was your background?
All right, so my career really started in the U.S. Army. In the Army, I served as an infantry officer. Loved every single second of it, but always knew I didn't want to make a career out of it. Just one of those things where I wanted to give back. So as my time was winding down in the Army, I was kind of deciding, okay, what's next? Needed a way to kind of transition out, get back to the civilian side of things. So that actually led me to getting my MBA. Went to get my MBA from NYU Stern. Phenomenal program. If anyone's looking to get their MBA, I can't recommend it enough. While I was getting my MBA, specialized in entrepreneurship and project management and marketing. For my entire life, I've always considered myself an entrepreneur. It's like a weird place to be, though, where you're an entrepreneur. Now what? How do you get involved with a startup? Do you start something on your own type of thing? So was getting my MBA. Always in the back of my mind, I was pursuing consulting and finance. You weirdly get pigeonholed into consulting and finance with a military background. So that was always like my safety net, but was actively looking for something more entrepreneurial, whether it was going to be joining a startup. I think that was the first place I started looking, was starting something on my own or joining something. Ultimately started to realize as my MBA time was winding up that I didn't have the next idea for Facebook or Google or something like that. So I started to really pursue other options of what being an entrepreneur would look like. And that's when I kind of stumbled into acquisition entrepreneurship. I wish I could say that I had like read some book or, took some class or something like that. And really it was more of like a slow process. Since acquiring the business, I've actually read all this stuff. I've been immersed in the community for so long. I love everything about it. But going into it, it was a much slower experience. And for me, it really started with, finding biz buy sell, which I'm sure everyone starts out on, and then learning about the SBA loan and learning what the process generally looked like. So as I'm getting ready to finish up my MBA, I started to realize, hey, maybe a way for me to get into entrepreneurship was by buying an existing business. Started doing research on biz buy sell, found a fitness studio that I thought was pretty cool, liked a lot about it, and I can get into more details as to what ultimately caused me to go that route. But really loved the business for a lot of different reasons. Also knew at the level I was buying a job, but I was prepared for that. Ended up acquiring the business after getting my MBA, worked in the business for about 2 years. The goal was always to kind of scale up and out and continue to scale the business, neither sit in a strategic role or kind of exit to something else to acquire something else potentially. Was able to do that after about 2 years. COVID was a little bit of a catalyst to that, and I can explain why. But me and my now co-owner, Ali, were trying to position me to help scale the business, grow me out of it a little bit. And then when COVID hit, it kind of accelerated stuff of like, okay, now it's the perfect time to kind of do it. When I exited the businesses, I actually came down and started working at a buddy's startup down here in Charleston, South Carolina. That's where I'm at today. So I still absentee, own the gyms, own Starfit. We're currently up to 3 locations. We're in the process of actually opening a 4th, which is like a quiet announcement. So hopefully no members are watching this, but we're internally working the gears to get a 4th spot going. For the past 4 years, I've been working at a growing startup too, which has also been a blast as well. I can very much play a role being either entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial. So it's like a cool place that I'm at where I still have a ton of skin in the game and a lot of say at the table and things like that. So I think I'll always have the acquisition itch, though. Definitely going to buy something else in the future. Just not sure when. Continuing to scale the stuff that we already have. So yeah, that's a little bit of my story. Oh, and one quick thing I do want to always emphasize. The reason I've been able to do this is because of the phenomenal team that's up at Starfit. And just the advice I can give to anyone who's considering buying a business or anything like that, is find the right people and then just clear a path for them. And that's ultimately what I did. I've got a team up there that is just world class in every facet of the word. And then they're just dominating up there and doing a great job. So I'm very lucky to have found them and to have them.
No, that's great. I guess going back to, when you were still pursuing your MBA, so you were doing the search sort of simultaneously, or was there a period of time you were full-time searching? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I started the process as my MBA was winding down, and I was juggling a couple different things. I was juggling looking to more of a conventional full-time role. I was juggling looking at potentially joining some type of startup, and then I was also juggling search. And because I was newer to search, I don't think I even realized the amount of work it was going to take to find a good business. So in a lot of ways, I was a little bit naive to it, which made me very lucky to have found a good business pretty early on, kind of going through the process. So it wasn't a full-on search process. It was one of those things where a few months after getting my MBA, I found the business and then just started really go through due diligence and things like that.
That's great timing. What did your buy box look like? Did you always know you were going to buy a gym? What were some of the other deals you looked at, or is this the first one you truly pursued?
Yeah, so I was not necessarily industry specific. There are things I knew I didn't want. A lot of like the conventional things. I was looking for something potentially services related. I wasn't necessarily looking at gyms, but it checked so many boxes of recurring revenue. I thought this location in particular had some really cool competitive advantages. They had a good active clientele that I mean, the LTV on these things for the clients is like world class. And I saw that early on that these concepts are very, very sticky. And that to me started to kind of set this apart from other things. It was that good, consistent, recurring revenue. And then on top of that, I think that the like real deal maker for me was the first time I walked into the floor of the location and the energy was awesome. And I was in there with my wife and I turned to her and I was like, holy shit, like these should be everywhere. And she was like, yeah, definitely. And that was like for us, like, okay, let's jump in and see what happens.
Got it. And this wasn't a franchise, it was an independent fitness studio. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I think one day we're unsure how we want to kind of grow it. We're leaning more towards a corporate model now, and I can explain as to why. But I think one day it could be, a ton of locations and or potentially a franchise.
No, that's I think it's more exciting to be the franchisor than the franchisee. So, uh,
Exactly.
no, that's very exciting. No, I'm curious. Did you look at other deals? Was this sort of like, you started looking, you found this, you started pursuing it, you got it under LOI immediately, and you just went for it, or were there other sort of, broken deals in between?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm trying to think through. I'd have to flash back. In my memory, I don't think there was anything that I was super confident in, meaning it wasn't like this or something else, or I hadn't gone deep in the path with anything else. I had found this one pretty early on. I remember it kept just popping up in how I was like tracking deals and things like that. And it was one of those things I couldn't take off my list. I almost like couldn't disprove it. And so I kept probing a little bit more and probing a little bit more, and ultimately ended up moving forward with it. And it's been, a phenomenal experience. But I think in terms of deal searching, I found it pretty early on in the process.
That's fantastic. And were you looking, I guess, as long as far as gyms go, I know a lot of gyms have a lot of trouble with retention of clientele. Why do you think, I guess, Starfit is so different, or why do you think they've been able to maintain their customers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for us, it's 100% because of how dialed in we are with our target demographic. And what I mean by that is StarFit is strength training for women. And in particular, it's small group and one-on-one. And because we know the clientele so well, I mean, the way we advertise, the way we set up classes, the way we do everything, we have a general idea of who's walking through the door. And so it allows us to serve that demographic incredibly well. It allows us to know what team members are going to be best for our clients. It allows us, two of our studios at times have been in the same shopping centers as, big box, very well-known national gyms, and we have no issue just because it's a completely different demographic that we're serving in a different, very specific way. So I think for us, a competitive advantage is being so niche in who we're serving that we can really offer them a premium white glove service specific to what they're looking for.
That's no, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess going back to, once you found the deal, how did you structure the offer? Was it competitive? How did you ultimately, get it under, I guess, signed LOI?
Yeah, it was like build the plane as I was flying it type of thing because I was still learning a little bit how the small business world worked. When I was getting my MBA, I took a few classes on M&A, but it was much higher. It was more at like the corporate level. So just doing as much research as possible. I really clicked with the seller at the time too, and I felt comfortable around them. And so it was very much a two-way conversation to kind of meet in the middle of where things kind of made sense for both of us and were win-win. Looking back now, it's funny too, because I try to advise against looking at a business where the seller's not retiring. Like ideally, you want someone who's retiring or had some major life event that explains why they're selling the business. And I think this seller was just had taken it to the level they could take it, and they were just done with it. That can be a major red flag. And I even after acquisition, I started to realize maybe why they were done with it and had a little bit of hiccups as I was kind of navigating it. But ultimately, it was just getting to know the seller, figuring out what his ultimate goals were, and then kind of using that to figure out where I was comfortable, maybe pulling back a little bit or increasing, and he was comfortable doing the same.
That's interesting. And what did you look for when you were conducting diligence on the deal post LOI?
Yeah, for in particular with the concepts that I bought, with the concept that I bought, it was very much getting into the back end systems to figure out how long clients were actually staying, to figure out if everything seemed as good on the surface as it did, um, like once I hopped in there and really started to peel it back. So for me, it was doing that. It was understanding the team that was in place. It was understanding if I were to scale, what that would look like. It was understanding, how were employees being comped, and did I think it was fair? Could we increase it? And then just figuring out what levers we could ultimately pull to take this thing to the next level. So I was kind of juggling a few things. One was the concept as strong as I thought, and did the numbers support that? Meaning attendance, churn, all this other stuff, lifetime value. And then also, were those numbers as strong as we thought, but also was this something we thought we could scale? And if so, how? And that was the stuff I was kind of like going through. And as I was doing the research, I was just checking through everything in my head. Ultimately, had I bought it and it stayed the size that it was at, I would have had a decent job, I guess is the best way to describe it. So my goal was to scale out and open more locations. And that was something that was always in the back of my mind. How scalable is this? Can the numbers support it? And then is the concept at the core really what it seems like it is? And a lot of the due diligence pointed towards that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of people reach out to me that, they're interested in buying a gym or buying a fitness studio. Are there certain metrics that they should be looking for when they, see a deal, let's say on BizBuySell, or they start talking to owners? Like, what are some numbers that you look for that sort of make it a good or bad deal when it comes to
Yeah,
gym?
definitely a good question, especially with gyms. I think a lot of people avoid the numbers with gyms. A lot of the industry, you can see people who have been a trainer or something for a really long time are super passionate about fitness, and they miss the business side of it. And that's not to say you can't have both. You can have both. And I've always been super passionate about fitness. I had a personal training certification that I picked up as I was buying the business. It wasn't a hard sell for me to an industry where I'm like, I don't want any part of this. But sometimes you'll see owners who run it not like a good business, and they can't get themselves out of it, and they want to train every class and they want to train every client. So I would say put a business lens on it, even if it's a passion project for you, and especially if it's not a passion project for you, make sure the numbers make sense. The numbers I would be most concerned with would be everything circling around lifetime value. So what does the average client pay? How long does the average client stay? And then generally, what are your churn rates? What you need to make sure that you have is a system that you can fill faster than the buckets are basically draining the water. So in essence, you need to make sure that your customer acquisition costs are below your lifetime value and like how fast you're churning clients out. And that would be the place I would always want to dive into with any type of studio or any type of fitness concept. And from there, you can kind of circle around everything else. There's levers that you can start to pull to increase lifetime value, whether it's offering a better product or service that causes people to stay longer, whether it's charging a little bit more because there's room to increase prices. There's just a lot of things that you can kind of pull to get there. But if you're going in early on and there's a break in the mass somewhere, you're gonna, for lack of a better term, you're gonna, bleed out or drain out very fast if you don't plug whatever the break is in the system.
That makes sense. And what is your perspective on, I guess, gyms that are more like the 24/7, like not really staffed versus something that's more like, your fitness studio, it's a lot of attention, white glove service. How would you compare those two different types of gyms?
Yeah, with the other ones I would call are more like big box, and that is all about a numbers game. In particular, some of those places, a lot of them, they don't want you showing up. They want this insane list of clients that, can be potentially hundreds, if not thousands long. And they want the majority of those clients not showing up because they don't have the space to support everyone at once. They want these people just quietly paying, $19, $20 a month or something like that. That's a decent concept. There's nothing wrong with that. That is completely different than us. We can, at our locations, run a very successful business with as little as 100 to 150 clients. Those locations, even when you're talking like an Orange Theory or something like that, to be profitable or doing well, they need 3, 4, 500 clients. For us, it's different because we're much smaller, we can get more white glove, much more personalized in the services that we're providing. And that allows us to charge more of a premium price. So I think those are the big levers that are different from us. Much more white glove for us, much more personalized, much more community driven. It allows us to charge a little bit of a higher price. All of our classes, our biggest class is only 8 clients at once. It's always run by a certified personal trainer. We also offer one-on-one. You walk into a big box 24-hour place, it's like, good luck, you're kind of on your own. And so they can obviously get a lot more people as paying clients, but at a much lower cost. I'm sorry, much lower price.
And is one, would you say, harder to run than the other? Like, would you, if you were to buy another gym, would you consider those big box ones? Or are you are you against those, I guess, maybe?
Uh, Good question. I think I'm split. It would depend. I really like the smaller concepts that we're in because it's so sticky. And a lot of we've created a environment where we have employees who have been with us for years and years and years, which isn't super common in the fitness industry. And it's because we comp very well and we take care of everyone and we create this awesome community that's fun to work at. You kind of lose that with the big box stuff. And then the big box stuff too, you're paying these massive leases with these massive footprints. If you're going a franchise route too, there's mandated times that you have to turn over equipment. So like the CapEx required of some of these things is just through the ceiling, where I think I don't want to misspeak, but some of the concepts, I think it's every 5 years or something, you have to replace every treadmill, and it's every 7 years. It's like 7 to 10 years, it's every piece of equipment. We don't have those headaches. We can open up in a really nice high-end shopping center in a 2,000 square foot or less location with a minimal amount of really solid equipment, things that you would see at like a CrossFit gym or something like that. Really quality stuff, but not this huge capex expenditure that we're having to deal with if we're going big box. So I'd probably stick to smaller footprint, and I think the advice I would give is get as niche as you possibly can to some type of demographic that maybe separates you from someone else. And if you're not going to niche, then it's all about nice equipment and probably as cheap as you can possibly do. So it's more like then you're in like the amenities game, or is cheap like a race to the bottom, which is probably not. Again, there's super successful ways of doing it, but I think for me, I'd probably go stick small.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the CapEx thing with, having to replace your equipment regularly. That makes sense. Kind of leads me to the next question, which is, what's your perspective on going, franchise versus independent when it comes to gyms and fitness studios? A lot of people ask me that because they're like, I see these Orange Theories for sale. or like, whatever other concepts. What's your take on that?
Yeah, the right franchise can be okay. You need the franchise to sell to you why you're better working for them or with them basically than just doing the same concept on your own. Fitness is fitness. And if you're delivering a solid class, I don't know why, and again, I don't want to like knock any of these brands, but certain brands here, they've got cool concepts and things like that, but you can replicate them if you're doing the other things right. If you're starting from the ground up and you want that support system and you want someone to get you, from 0 to 1 faster, then a franchise is not a bad option. I would say though, in the fitness industry in particular, the franchisors have been hit pretty hard as of late. When you talk about things like Pure Barre and F45s and things like that, the franchisor, in maybe no fault of their own, I don't know. I don't want to, again, like point fingers or anything, but there's some questionable things going on there where if you're going to get partnered with a fitness franchise, I would just make sure that the support is really there and that the value's really there. Because you can learn pretty fast in the gym industry and there's mentorship programs out there and things like that. And if it's going to take you, 3 to 5 years to learn a concept, or less than that, sorry, 1 to 3 years for you to really understand the industry, but you've done that through a franchise, then you're paying them that, that fee for life, or at least 10 years until you can figure out what's next type of thing.
Yeah, no, and no, that makes total sense. And I think what's scary to me is, this is just anecdotal, but even just looking at the concepts, around me, like they just go out of business and just they fall
Exactly.
out of trend. And, spinning was big, now it's not so big. And there's these like surfboard or like rowing studios that maybe now are out of business because that's not cool anymore. And so I always think about that as like, something
It's
that maybe is not trendy is what I'd be looking for.
Yeah, it's so dead on. And what actually, COVID's a perfect example for us. COVID hit, we were not a franchise concept, so it allowed us to pivot immediately. I mean, we went virtual within hours. We had like done all this stuff. We had started filming classes in the studio. We started doing stuff through Zoom. Like the team was phenomenal at like us transitioning through that. And if you were a franchise concept, you were just waiting on the franchise to push down whatever the next steps were going to be. And in cases that could have taken, weeks or months if it ever happened at all. And that is just an analogy of where the gym industry moves very fast. One of the things I love about our concept is it's just tied down to the basics. We do the basics really well. Strength training that's been done for probably hundreds of years at this point. We're not some like gimmicky concept where some crazy things going on that's like unique and it's like a flash in the pan type of thing. We do have some cool timers and stuff to make it a little bit more fun, kind of gamify it. But at the core, we're just strength training. And I think when you get caught up in some of these franchises, if it's more of a fad and the fad goes out of style, there's no way to pivot. Whereas like if we woke up tomorrow and people were like, okay, no one wants to do strength training anymore, then it would be very painful for us, but we could be like, okay, cool, let's change all the studios to be insert whatever the next thing is. Again, I don't think it's going anywhere, but that would be the path you can go. If you're franchised though, you're waiting for them to tell you kind of what's next. And if it doesn't, it's like for them, it's like driving the Titanic. If they make one move, they've got to do it for however many studios they have across the country. Everyone's got to kind of fall in line. It's got to make sense for everyone. When you're your own concept, you can pivot and move around a lot faster. Again, that's not to say there aren't some good franchises to be bought or, some bigger box gyms or things like that. But I really like the leanness of these models and I like not being handcuffed to a franchise.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I guess going back to, when you were getting the deal to close, how did you finance the transaction? You mentioned SBA. What was your experience with SBA like, and how did you navigate that process?
I'm glad you asked that actually, because I worked with Live Oak Bank and there's like 5 businesses I've worked with throughout my life that have always stuck with me as phenomenal customer experience, phenomenal everything from start to finish. And Live Oak was one of those banks. I'll never forget, and I still have contact with the guy who was in charge of my account. He's actually now very senior at Live Oak. But but he came to visit me. We met in person. He was helping me with some of the deal stuff. He checked out the studios. They sent someone on site maybe a while after to just check in that things were good. It was just such a phenomenal experience working with Live Oak. In terms of financing and things like that, I had some money saved up from deployment when I was in the Army, and it transitioned that and was kind of deciding what to do with that money, and had the 10% down to kind of cover, was navigating how things worked with the SBA, got very lucky in finding Live Oak. At the time, they were one of the bigger names there, but to me, I think I had Live Oak and I forget the other name of another bank, but I had a few banks looking at it, and Live Oak just won in everything. They won in time, they won in terms, they won in just customer service. And I've been working with Live Oak since then. And if anybody's looking, my recommendation is Live Oak first and foremost. It's okay to shop around too. Don't feel like you're locked into one bank. But if you're asking me, I've been with Live Oak since I've owned these businesses, and I can't say enough positive things.
Yeah, and it's no, I'm glad to hear you had a good experience. And they are sort of number one in terms of volume of transactions, so they're definitely used to doing these deals.
Totally.
I'm curious with, so you did the 10% down. What did that process actually look like, from start to finish? How long did it take? Sort of what did they ask from you? Were there any sort of like pain points throughout the process? Yeah.
We had, I'm trying to think through the pain points. For the most part, it was pretty seamless with Live Oak. I was working with another bank, and I don't want to say it because it was a bad experience, and it's like a big national bank. For some reason, I didn't know enough about it. So when I was doing it, I was like, oh, cool, let me go to the same place I get like my checking account and stuff done. Started working with them, and it's just not a great experience. And it's like hiccup after hiccup. And I remember that part of the deal, I think it took like a month and a half. I think we had to increase the due diligence time period. We had to push back closing to wait for this other bank. And finally, I'm like, there's got to be another route to go. And I reached out to two other banks. Both were very good. Actually, three other, one really small local, two bigger SBA lenders. And I think from Live Oak, I'm not kidding you, from start to finish of me working with them was like 2 weeks. The reason it was so fast, is because we already had all the paperwork and everything done for the other banks. And so it was like a very fast 2 weeks to like decision type of thing. So it was one of those things where it started very choppy, but when I got in the right hands, it moved exceptionally fast.
And what were some of the things they wanted from you, and how much time did it take you when you were actually like going through that underwriting process? Like, what did the time, I guess, involvement look like from you?
Yeah. Actually, it's my least favorite part of owning a business, period. And it's like every time if we go for any funding or anything like that, and I don't know what it is. I hate you have to open up all your financials. And you're in like this weird vulnerable position where you're like every bank account you own, every investment account, any assets you own, you're having to show to the bank, and they're like, well, tell me why this transaction went here or went here type of thing. So that part of it, you're very vulnerable. It's uncomfortable. If it puts anyone at ease, everybody goes through it. You're going to feel like you're doing something wrong, and you're like, oh, they're never going to accept me. They're going to ask about this or that or the other thing. So I started with that a little bit with the first bank because it was a brand new experience for me. And I was like, oh no, are they asking for this? Cause like they found something they don't like. Is it not going to go through? But basically you just have to gather everything. You're gathering all your bank information. You're building a PFS, a personal financial statement, which has just got details of anything you're spending money on basically, or anything that's coming into you. And then basically any assets or liabilities you have all get factored into there. Some details you have to add to the bottom of that. The PFS alone can take, a few hours, if not more, a few days, depending on how much you have your stuff organized to kind of get into place. And then it's getting proof of everything else after that. And it's, form after form. Then there are forms for the SBA. So it's one of those things where it's just a buildup of more and more paperwork to kind of get your file ready to go.
And when you did get, I guess, approved, how long did it take? I guess, how long did the process take from start to close? You mentioned 2 weeks to, I guess, getting the actual sort of commitment letter, I'm guessing. What did that look like afterwards? Or if you had to count the entire process, how long did it take you?
Yeah, I guess I'm not fully sure. I'd have to like really take a step back and think it through. I just remember we were working with the big national bank and everything was looking good. And then it started to kind of slow down, and then it started to push our timeline. And it was almost enough to kill the whole deal of just like, and I didn't realize I could open up other options or other things like that. And then when Live Oak came in, it sped the whole thing up. I would put that around working with the first bank. We may have been like 2 months into it or something like that, and things were just going very slow. And then once we brought in Live Oak, everything went very fast. I think we ended up closing a little bit later than we thought we were going to close, but the seller was fine with it. So was a broker. So we're able to kind of push through it. I guess I'm like thinking out loud. I probably can't give you a good enough
Yeah.
exact start to finish date. It was just so long ago.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. And what did the transition then look like? Was the seller still involved for a period of time? What was sort of I guess unexpected or expected during the transition?
Yeah. So uh, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. And anytime I talk to someone about buying a business, you hear so much about, I've heard it on other podcasts and people talk about it before. They call it like the fetal moment, where maybe 3 to 6 months into buying it, you're like, oh my God, this was a mistake. Um, and you're like, holy crap, I took this massive personal guarantee. By the way, with me, I picked a business that I was working in. So it was like hard to figure out how to get out if I needed to. You kind of go through all that narrative in your head. I would say it's very hard to see the forest beyond the trees kind of when you're in the middle of it. If you're in that position or right when you transition, just stick to the plan. Like it's going to take time. It's going to take repetitions. I can almost guarantee, depending on what business you buy, there's going to be skeletons in the closet. You did all the due diligence possible. You had your CPA look over it. You had your attorney. You had everyone go over everything, and you're not going to catch it. Hopefully, it's not like a catastrophic thing, and usually it won't be. But it's one of those things where I never want to glorify the process, because right after I bought, you have this really high where you're like, yes, this is so cool. And like now I'm a business owner. And in all actuality, I didn't see like the train coming on the tracks behind me, which is like the hard stuff's about to start. And so you then kind of dip down into a little bit of these lows where you're like, it's like buying a used car and you open up the hood and you're like, damn, like they got me a little bit on that or a little bit on this. And the seller was awesome, by the way. There was nothing nefarious going on. It was just one of those things where it was a rough business and there were a lot of things under the hood that had to be fixed. And I've like a visceral moment like seared in my memory of getting a text message at like 10 p.m. or something like that from one of our trainers who had the 4 a.m. class. And he basically had gotten poached by Orange Theory from us. And he was like, good luck. And so I was sitting there at 10 a.m. like, yeah, this is exactly what I signed up for. Like I'll be training the 4 a.m. class. And I think I had the 4 a.m. class for a few weeks until we could find someone else. But that was kind of what I had signed up for. And at times it wasn't pretty. Um, but I would, say to anyone, you're going to go through it a little bit, but there is light at the end of the tunnel.
That's a crazy story about the four. It's a good thing you were in the military because I wouldn't have been able to do a 4 a.m. class. That is crazy.
I was questioning a lot at that point of just like, what have I done? And one of my favorite battalion commanders in the Army used to always say, careful how bad you want something because you may get it bad. And I swear that was just looping in my head of like, you couldn't just go a normal path of consulting. Like you had to do the entrepreneurial thing. You had to buy the small business. It's like, look what you did type of thing. And again, years and years through it now, I'm looking back and it's one of the best decisions I've ever made my entire life. But you want to go to like year one, Bill, he's probably like, is this the dumbest thing I've ever done type of thing? So it all worked out. It will work out for most buyers too, just based on the data. Most acquisition entrepreneurs, you're putting yourself in a much better chance of success than starting something from the bottom up. Again, not easy, but high chance of success.
No, 100%. I guess, in that first year, how long did it take for you to kind of learn the business? And at what point were you starting to fix things, start improving things? Like how long did you transition from like just absorbing to like actually, changing things and improving things?
Yeah, I know it's a big thing to always say don't touch anything for like 90-ish days. The Army's the exact same way. Anytime you take over a new platoon or a new unit, they say don't do anything for 90 days. I still generally advise that just because you're going to go in day one and you'll be like, this is broken, that's broken. Like, I want to fix this, I want to fix that. And then, day 30, you're going to be like, okay, now I see why they were doing it that way. And like day 60, you're going to be like, okay, now I see why they were doing it, but like I've got a better way to do it. And then day 90, you're going to know the team members enough. You're going to know where to push, where to pull type of thing that you can actually drive meaningful change. Again, if you're hopping in though and something's blatantly on fire, put out the fire or like make it better. It's not to say don't do that, but it is to say hop in and take a tactical pause to kind of figure stuff out. I think the stuff that I started to do immediately was to get to know the team and figure out how I could make their lives better. To try to me, the way I saw growing the business outside of some of like the levers and pricing and different things that we could pull, and we had a whole plan on how we were going to do that. But the first problem that I had to solve was make it a good place to work, to keep really high talent, good caliber trainers in there. And I got very lucky. We had a really senior manager in there who's still there. She's a co-owner now. She's phenomenal. She's does everything. And we also had some really good trainers in there who were staying in spite of how we were treating them. And it's not to say that we were treating them bad per se, but the pay was not as good as it should have been. It was really rough hours. We had a training structure that was like heavy on your feet. And they just loved the client so much that they were kind of willing to put up with it. And so it was getting to know the trainers and then slowly starting to kind of implement some changes that we thought made sense. And then on top of that too, it was like the small stuff, like the things I could do immediately. And this is so weird because it's one of the things that gym industry's taught me is if you're doing a task that's below your theoretical hourly wage, then pass it to someone else to do that so you can do bigger things for the business. I.e., if you're cleaning the gym floors or if you're cleaning the bathrooms, it's totally fine. But eventually you want to pay someone else to do that so you can do the higher ticket items or the higher value driving things. And when I first started out, I was doing everything. And some of it was by design, but some of it was like it needed work. And what I mean by that is, I would train classes, clean the entire studio, clean the bathrooms, start to try to figure out how we're doing ads, start to see who the good team members were, who the good team members weren't. And it kind of kept me busy in a good way. And I'd say it probably took about 90 days to start making more strategic decisions. And then it took like, months and months and eventually years to make really big strategic decisions, including knowing when we could lever price up or down, knowing when we could change the concept in a way that it was going to impact clients. But so like I'm all over the place now, but our clients in particular, they love the concept so much that if you change anything about it, you better have a good reason as to why type of thing. And it took me, months and months with Ali, the now co-owner, of like really building the trust of clients that like there's not going to be major changes here. And then when we made these small changes, we had the room and the grace because they knew we were investing back in the studios. They knew we were working really hard on it.
No, look, it's fantastic. I mean, it sounds like you did the grunt work, but then you kind of through that, probably learned every facet of the business and kind of knew what the levers even were. No, that's super interesting. I'm curious, what were sort of some of the major decisions or choices you guys made that led to, the growth of the business, I guess maybe that first location as well as, the eventual second, third, and now fourth location?
Yeah, the biggest stuff for us was, and I always harp on it, was really understanding our target demographic, who we serve and how we serve them. What are their jobs, pains, and gains? And once we kind of identified that, it gave us the idea of where to start to pull the levers from a financial standpoint in a way that made sense. The quickest way to kind of describe what was going on and where we ended up taking the business. The seller of the business was very much chasing Orange Theory or like similar concepts. What does that mean? That means you need classes of, 30 some odd people. You need them full on repeat. You need you need 400 members in the gym just to be doing well. It also means you can drive lower prices. And at the time, Orange Theory was doing like a 189 unlimited package. So when I took over, guess what we had? A 189 unlimited package. The problem is our concept at the time was capping out at like 8 to 12. Their concept was capping out at like 30. The numbers just didn't make sense. what was even worse was we were violating a lot of the core things that our core demographic wanted, which was much more specific one-on-one training or small group, much more white glove, much more community driven. And so ultimately the levers we were able to pull was to kind of go more premium, start to pay trainers more, get more elite trainers in there, start to pay managers and customer success managers to do the small stuff really well, pick up on birthdays, pick up on someone's 100th session, make sure people are getting cool gear for being in there, but also having really good trainers in there who are very good at one-on-one and small group. And so ultimately we could start to increase what we were charging for clients by having this more premium service. And still we weren't losing clients as we were doing it because it was such a sticky product. And then the last thing that we did, and this took time, and it took time, I'll tell you why in a sec, was we brought on one-on-one training. And that is now roughly 30 to 40% of the business at each location. And that was fought very hard because we have a really cool small group concept. And when you start to bring in one-on-one in some of these small footprints that we were in, there wasn't a ton of space for it. But that was something, it wasn't fought too much, but like we fought a little bit to kind of put that in there. And those were ultimately the levers we pulled. It was going more premium, smaller groups, more premium, increased costs, better service.
I mean, it seems like you listen to your customers and just, acting on that. So that makes a lot of sense. And I guess one other question is, at what point did you think you were going to then expand into other locations? And then I guess, how did you finance those?
Yeah, it's a great question. When it comes to gym ownership, one of the biggest mistakes gym owners make is opening a new location. It's such a crazy, like they're like, oh, I'm successful at one, so I have to have two. And they run into this issue where it's like, if you've got a really good concept, you don't necessarily have to expand to another. So that was always in the back of my mind. I think for us, when we were at two locations, one of the locations was like splitting at the seams. So we actually had to move it to a spot that was 3 times the size. We actually did that recently. And we just had so many indicators that what we were doing was working and that the lifetime value was there, that we were sitting there and we're like, okay, we've wanted to expand this. We think we can expand it. We've hit almost every measurable metric that we want to expand it. Let's go ahead and try it. And so we went out and did the expansion to the third spot. And like, that was like our big test of how we would do it on repeat. So that was one of those things where it's been great learning. It grew fast. It's in a good position to where we hit all the indicators to potentially open the fourth spot. For the fourth spot, I think we're going to go dip back into SBA funding. We're talking actively right now with Live Oak to open the fourth spot. I think we could self-fund it if we wanted to, but we want to go faster. So we're juggling that a little bit of how much debt do we want to, how much SBA lending do we want to take off versus speed and things like that. So we use the SBA again to help with some growth as well.
Got it. That makes sense. And how far are the locations from one another?
So the DC area well, or like the Northern
Yeah.
Virginia area well, where like you can be, some of them are 5 to 7-ish miles apart. So I would say most of them are all within like the Northern Virginia circle right outside of DC. With traffic and stuff like that, though, it's like another planet.
Yeah.
So it's really good for us because trainers can bounce between studios. They can pick up more hours if they want. Managers can bounce between studios. Our plan is to stay in the Northern Virginia, DC, Maryland area for as long as we can, just because we have so much support there and such an amazing, we also have like a mini corporate team that can bounce from studio to studio. So a lot of good stuff up there.
And it means that there's not a ton of competition between the locations, I'm guessing, because the clientele, is going to be living closer to each location as opposed to feeling like, they need to go to the one that's farther away for whatever reason, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think every time we've opened one, we'll lose like 3 to 5 clients in an existing one because they were driving from like really far. They found the concept. Sometimes what'll happen is they find it because it's near where they work or something like that, and they're hitting it up, and then they switch jobs and they live really far away, but they still want to drive, and then we open a new concept closer. So we're usually like probably drop 1 to 3 or 3 to 5 clients to a new opening studio, but nothing crazy.
And at least you're still keeping them in a different studio. So
Oh, definitely. And we allow people to studio hop too. We don't have too many people do it, but we've got the ability for anyone to use a class wherever they want.
that's great. I guess one final question is, we're close to, the hour mark, which is crazy. This has been great. And I guess question is just, one of the most impressive things, in my opinion, that you did was just eventually become fully absentee. And that's probably like one of the biggest questions that people have is, everyone's dream is to find that manager that can take over and, they can be out of state like you and even working another job entirely. Talk a little bit more about how you made that happen.
Yeah, it's all about empowering good people around you. And early on in the process, her name's Allie. She's like the backbone of the system. Allie was a senior trainer, maybe a manager at the time when I was acquiring the businesses. And it was just so easy to see early on how awesome she was for the concept and how I needed to get as much help from her as possible in every facet of the word. So for me, it was about getting her skin in the game, making her an owner over time, things like that. But also, she's got like the EQ, she's got the IQ, she's got everything you need to be growing a business like this. So for me, ultimately, it was getting in there. It was me learning as much as possible from her at this stuff she was really good at and is really good at. And there's a ton. So, I mean, I was learning from her still to this day, but for years on how to deal with clients, how to do certain things, what works, what doesn't. And then I brought in a skill set more business lined, more numbers oriented. We were just a very good match for each other. And my ultimate role was to clear a path for her. Be like, cool, you want another concept? Like, let me worry about the funding. Let me worry about some of the annoying stuff that you don't want to worry about. Like, you deal with filling the place and all the other stuff. And so she's been phenomenal. We have another senior manager in the concept now, and her name's Danielle, and she's the exact same way. And it's like it's taken years to find these people, and sometimes they'll sit in the system for a while and just kind of slowly rise up. And then it's just like getting them in the system, making sure that they're taken care of and happy, and then just like clearing a path for them, empowering the people who are better than me at so much of this stuff to go do what they're really good at. It ultimately got me to a position where, the theoretical, like middle of the night call, when that's happening, I'm confident that we've got multiple people now who would pick up that phone call and go in with the same energy that I would to fix whatever the problem is. And then the other thing, I debated on saying this, and my wife said, don't say it because it's not a value add, but I think it is potentially. We're at a point now where I've never actually been in any of the studios. And it's because we've moved some of them and we've opened a new one. And like, so it's crazy to kind of say that these things are growing with minimal like input from me. I'm still playing a role and like helping where I can help out and doing a lot of like the strategic level stuff. But the team up there, I cannot say enough about them. And we've all just had this really awesome ability to all work really well together and scale the concept together. And our goal is to keep scaling it. And I keep saying we because to me, that's one of the most important things you can do as an owner. If you have an operator in your concept and you want them to be a part of the team and you want them to treat it like it's their own business, then give them things that make it their own business. However you want to do that, whether it's equity or anything like that, I think that's the path to freeing yourself from a business.
No, I think it's very impressive that you haven't visited the locations. I mean, that's like, I don't know,
Now,
in some ways the dream that
now
you
I'm like debating because even I was up in Northern Virginia a few weeks back. All my family's still up there, so I make it up there all the time. And like, I was debating popping in on one of the locations, and I was like, well, now I kind of can't. Now I just like I've got to keep going to see how long I can go. But I don't know. Yeah, I haven't been in to any of them now just because we've rotated spots and opened new ones. So it's kind of cool to say.
that's I love that. It's hilarious and amazing that you can even, make that happen. And I think people oftentimes don't understand the concept of like absentee. What does that actually materialize? How does that materialize for you? Obviously you're still involved strategically in all of those things, what does that mean from both a time commitment perspective and just like what your role is now?
Yeah, it's interesting. The term absentee it's almost like it's like not a real thing in the sense of you're never fully absentee, nor do you ever want to be, by the way. Like I would be so uncomfortable if I didn't have my hand all over the numbers and wasn't talking with Allie through text and things like that. So I guess what absentee more means is you have a choice of when you're hopping in and when you're not. For me, what that looks like, and I've also been very lucky with the startup that I'm at today. They're very aware that I own other businesses and that it's something that I'm actively working on, but I'm very much full-time in this startup, meaning I'll hop into Starfit stuff if there's like an emergency, but it's almost always off hours or on the weekends type of thing. I think my role very much at this point is, uh, you know, Allie and Danielle, who are back on the team, they're like boots on the ground. I joke with them all the time just because there's funny things that are always happening within the gyms and things like that. So it's helping out there. I play a lot of the tech role as well of whether it's connecting Zaps or measuring how we're kind of tracking things. Very much doing a lot of the financial stuff as well. Whether, checking our books with our bookkeepers and then managing a lot of what I would call like our contractors. So like I used to do all of our ads, for example, and now we have an ads team that does it. And I'll check in with them usually through email, like once a month, where I just go scrub high level metrics and I'm like, hey, let's optimize this or let's do that. But even now, Allie does a lot of that stuff as well. So rambling way of saying there have been times where I barely touched a thing because I'm so swamped with the startup I'm at, which is awesome, by the way, that I'm just full time into the startup stuff. And I mean, when I say times, I'm talking like months and months and months and months. And then there are times where if I've, free time here or there, I'm checking in on this or checking in on that. I'd say on like a monthly, weekly basis, I'm looking at like a few hours here, a few hours there, but it's often by choice type of thing.
Oh, that's literally the dream. I love that. Look, I know we're at time, but just I guess one final question, if people want to reach you, what's the best place? And actually, before that even, any last final, I always ask this, final words of advice for first-time buyers out there. Yeah, before we I guess end the interview.
Um, Trying to think of something like super profound. I guess I don't really have anything. It's a lot of everything. When you go to buy, you don't have to have all the answers up front. And I can say that it's funny now, I've been studying the industry for almost 10 years now, and I'm super passionate about it. I know all these different ways to structure deals and, different ways to do all this cool stuff that I wish I knew when I was buying. But guess what? I didn't know it. And like, as I was going along, I was just learning as I was going. I had a general background in like an MBA. It didn't hurt, but it wasn't like the decision maker. Oh, you have to have an MBA or anything like that. The majority of my career was in the military. And so there's not a lot of one-for-one transfer over, but it's just learning every step. Like you do one thing, you learn the next step. You do another thing, you learn the next step. I think people get super intimidated when they're looking at this stuff and they think you've got to be some like guru with all this stuff and that it could never be them. It's someone else who's going to do it. So I would say that this is a very viable opportunity for a lot of people. And like, I'm not exceptional in any type of way. I'll tell you who's exceptional in Starfit. It's Allie, it's Danielle, it's the trainers that I have. Those are people who are like elite and very good at what they're doing. And so I think you can go through the acquisition process and you're going to be nervous and you're going to be looking around. You always feel like I'll just speak to myself. Oftentimes when I was buying the business, I felt like the dumbest person in the room. You're surrounded by bankers, you're surrounded by CPAs and the brokers. You feel like they've all done this 1,000 times and you're just like, yeah, I agree with that. Like, that sounds good. But it's like, not a lot of people know fully what they're doing. So like, I would say either get a coach or get a program that can help you through it or be comfortable with being uncomfortable. But I think that would be my advice to my younger version of myself. And then the other thing, which I already touched on, is like, you're going to hit the fetal moment, whether you want to or not, of like, you're going to question everything. You're going to think you made the worst move ever. And I would just say, keep sticking to the plan, keep chipping away, and, data's on your side that you're going to be successful. If you bought a business that's been around for a long time and checks a lot of the criteria you would generally want to be looking for.
That's great advice. I guess, leads me to my final question. If, anyone wants to reach out, after watching this interview, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm happy to give my email. I'm happy to give my cell. I'm super passionate about all this stuff. So people can reach out at any point that they want, whether it's with Starfit stuff or if they're thinking of acquisition stuff, I know a ton about it. And then text, call, anything. If you want, I can give that information now, or we can like paste it below, whatever is easiest.
Yeah. I'll paste it in the description. Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for your time. I know we went over, so really thank you for your generosity today, and really enjoyed this interview. I learned a lot. I know everyone else will feel the same way. So thank you again.
Yeah, definitely. And I really appreciate you taking the time and having me on. And I love what you're doing with the industry. I think it's awesome. I think there's a huge need for it. So really appreciate you as well.
Thanks, Bill.